The stench hits first. Sulfur and decay, thick enough to taste. Corporal Eugene Sledge crouches at the tunnel entrance, his hands trembling around his rifle. Inside that darkness, something moves. Not the rustling of rats or the settling of stone, the deliberate shuffle of men who've been waiting in silence for hours. His sergeant signals forward. No choice now. The flamethrower operator steps up, and Sledge watches the nozzle angled toward that black mouth in the coral rock. Someone's about to die in there. Maybe all of them. On Peleliu Island, September 15, 1944, the United States Marine Corps is learning a new kind of hell. One that doesn't end when you take the beach. One that hides in limestone and waits with infinite patience. What the Marines are about to discover in these tunnels will redefine every assumption about Japanese defensive warfare and cost them more blood per square mile than any battle in Marine Corps history. This is not the war they trained for. This is something older. Something that turns an island smaller than Manhattan into a meat grinder that chews up entire battalions and never stops. If you want to understand the battles that shaped our world, the real stories told with respect and accuracy, hit that subscribe button now. You're about to witness something most history books won't tell you. Peleliu. A speck of coral limestone and the Palau Island chain, 6 miles long and 2 miles wide, sitting in the Western Pacific, roughly 500 miles east of the Philippines. September 15, 1944. The strategic reasoning seems sound on paper in Admiral William Halsey headquarters. Secure this island to protect General MacArthur's right flank during the upcoming Philippines invasion. Neutralize the airfield, deny the Japanese a base. The operation receives a designation, Stalemate 2. Marine Major General William Rupertus, commanding the 1st Marine Division, promises his men a quick fight. 3 days, maybe 4 at most. The Marines who will hit those beaches include veterans of Guadalcanal and Cape Gloucester, men who've seen combat before, but nothing in their experience has prepared them for what Lieutenant General Sadao Inoue and Colonel Kunio Nakagawa have been building beneath their feet for months. The Japanese High Command has learned from catastrophic losses at Tarawa, Saipan, and Guam. The suicidal banzai charges, the deaths on beaches under naval bombardment, the futile defense of coastal positions, all of it has been studied, dissected, and abandoned. A new defensive doctrine emerges from Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo. Defense in depth, centered on caves and tunnels designed to maximize American casualties while accepting that the defenders will die to the last man. Colonel Nakagawa commands roughly 10,000 troops on Peleliu, a mix of the veteran 14th Infantry Division and supporting naval personnel. He receives 6 months to prepare, and he uses every day. His engineers carve over 500 interconnected cave positions into the coral ridges that dominate the island's interior, particularly the area the Marines will come to call the Umerbrogel Pocket, though the Marines have a simpler name for it, Bloody Nose Ridge. These are not simple caves. Japanese engineers study the coral limestone and realize it offers perfect defensive terrain, soft enough to excavate by hand, but strong enough to resist naval bombardment. They create a 3-dimensional maze, small firing apertures perfectly positioned to cover each other, larger chambers for ammunition storage and troop shelter, connecting tunnels with blast doors that can seal off sections, ventilation shafts that allow air circulation and prevent gas attacks from being effective, multiple entrances and exits, so defenders can disappear after firing and reappear elsewhere. Some caves go 5 levels deep, some connect to caves hundreds of yards away. They position their heaviest weapons, 47mm anti-tank guns and 20mm anti-aircraft guns, inside these positions, protected from everything except a direct hit that destroys the entire ridge face. They stockpile ammunition, rice, and water for months of fighting. Most importantly, Nakagawa trains his men in a new discipline: patience. No screaming charges, no wasted fire. Wait until the Americans are so close that every bullet kills. Let them take the beaches. Let them think they're winning. then bleed them in the interior, where their naval guns and aircraft cannot help them, where the coral itself becomes an enemy. The pre-invasion bombardment begins September 12, 1944. For 3 days, the United States Navy pounds Peleliu with over 2,700 tons of shells. Battleships, cruisers, and destroyers fire until their gun barrels glow. Carrier aircraft drop bombs and napalm until smoke obscures the entire island. Navy spotters report the island neutralized, with no visible defenses remaining. Admiral Jesse Oldendorf believes nothing could have survived. He is catastrophically wrong. The bombardment destroys some surface positions and kills Japanese soldiers caught in the open, but the cave system remains almost entirely intact. The Marines who board their Amtraks on the morning of September 15th believe they're hitting a softened target. They believe the worst fighting will happen on the beach, that once they push inland, the island will fall quickly. They believe General Rupertus's 3-day estimate. The landing craft hit the water at 8:30 in the morning. The 1st Marines on the left, the 5th Marines in the center, the 7th Marines on the right, all heading toward beaches designated White 1, White 2, Orange 1, Orange 2, and Orange 3. The first waves reach shore and meet immediate, devastating fire. Japanese artillery and mortars, zeroed in on every inch of beach during months of preparation, begin shredding the assault waves before the Marines can even get off the sand. The water itself becomes a killing zone. Japanese gunners target Amtraks as they approach, setting them ablaze with their Marines trapped inside. Those who make it to shore find themselves pinned behind a coral shelf that provides slight cover, but also traps them against the ocean. The temperature exceeds 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Men loaded with 70 pounds of gear begin collapsing from heat exhaustion within minutes. Snipers, invisible in prepared positions, pick off anyone who stands. The 1st Marines, attacking toward the southern tip of the island called the Point, suffered the worst casualties. 26% of the regiment becomes casualties on the first day alone.
But the Marines do what Marines do. They push forward. By nightfall of September 15, they hold a fragile beachhead. The airfield, Peleliu's primary strategic objective, falls within 48 hours, taken by the 5th Marines in brutal close-quarters fighting. Yet this victory means almost nothing. The real battle hasn't begun. As Marines push deeper into the island's interior, they encounter terrain unlike anything in their experience. The coral ridges rise in jagged, broken formations, a landscape of razor-sharp stone that tears uniforms and flesh alike, of sinkholes and crevices that break ankles, of vegetation so sparse it offers no concealment. And everywhere, there are caves, small ones, large ones, caves that seem empty until fire erupts from them, caves that swallow grenades without effect, caves that pour out defenders who vanish back underground before Marines can respond. The 1st Marine Division begins dying in those ridges, not in dramatic charges or single climactic battles, but in hundreds of small, vicious engagements, where 3 Marines die to kill 2 Japanese, where entire squads get shredded by machine gun fire they never see coming, where exhaustion and heat and fear accumulate until men simply break. Eugene Sledge, whose memoir With the Old Breed will become the most harrowing first-hand account of Pacific War infantry combat, describes the moment his unit realizes what they're facing. We were fighting the island itself, and the Japanese were part of it, buried in it, waiting. Standard Marine tactics, rush forward, use overwhelming firepower, close with the enemy, fail completely in this environment. Artillery bombardment bounces off coral or disappears into caves. Aerial bombing moves dirt but rarely collapses cave systems. Naval gunfire cannot depress low enough to hit positions dug into reverse slopes. The Marines try everything. They pour gasoline into cave entrances and ignite it. The defenders retreat deeper, wait for the flames to die, return to firing positions. They roll grenades inside. The caves have blast walls that absorb the explosions. They call in tank support. The Shermans become targets for Japanese anti-tank guns firing from cave positions the tankers cannot spot. Men go insane trying to fight an enemy they cannot see, cannot fix, cannot defeat with courage alone. The breakthrough, such as it is, comes not from revolutionary new weapons, but from the systematic, exhausting application of combined arms at the smallest unit level, the kind of innovation born from desperation and paid for in blood. Marine combat engineers become the critical asset. These men carry flamethrowers, satchel charges, and demolitions, and they develop, through trial and terrible error, a technique for reducing cave positions. First, a rifle squad provides covering fire at every visible aperture, forcing defenders away from firing ports. Second, a Marine with a flamethrower approaches, often crawling over open ground under fire, and shoots a burst of jellied gasoline into the cave entrance. This serves not primarily to kill, but to consume oxygen and force defenders deeper. Third, while smoke and flames still pour from the entrance, engineers rush forward with satchel charges, canvas bags loaded with 20 pounds of TNT, and throw them as deep into the cave as possible. Then everyone runs. The explosion, contained by coral walls, creates overpressure that kills through concussive force even when fragmentation cannot. Finally, a demolitions team moves in and seals the entrance with explosives, collapsing the rock face or filling the opening with rubble. This works, but it requires extraordinary courage and coordination, and it is unbearably slow. A single cave might take hours to reduce. Some caves have multiple entrances that must be identified and hit simultaneously, or the defenders simply move through connecting tunnels and reoccupy cleared positions. Marines learn to mark reduced caves with white phosphorus grenades, whose smoke lingers, only to return the next morning and receive fire from the same cave. The Japanese have dug out the rubble overnight and reoccupied it. The psychological toll becomes as devastating as the physical casualties. Men watch their friends burned alive when flamethrowers malfunction. They suffocate in caves when smoke and cordite fill the air. They die from friendly fire when satchel charges explode early. They die from heat stroke, from dehydration, when water supplies cannot reach forward positions because evacuation routes cross open ground under constant sniper fire. Colonel Nakagawa's strategy works exactly as intended. By September 23rd, 8 days into a battle that was supposed to last 3, the 1st Marines have suffered such catastrophic losses that they must be withdrawn from combat entirely, something that has never happened to a Marine regiment before. Over 65% casualties, companies reduced to platoon strength, platoons reduced to squads, squads reduced to 2 or 3 men. The Army's 81st Infantry Division gets called in to replace them, and they died just as readily. The press back home begins reporting on the forgotten battle and America's worst battle, but the truth is worse than journalists can convey. This is not a battle. This is a systematic slaughter measured in yards per day, where the definition of victory becomes capturing a single ridge or clearing a single draw. October becomes a month of horror. The fighting in the Umarburgel Pocket, that central mass of coral ridges where Nakagawa has concentrated his strongest defenses, develops a rhythm of death that never varies. Each morning, Marine companies move out to attack positions they've attacked the day before. Japanese fire slaughter them from positions they thought they'd destroyed. They call in airstrikes that accomplish nothing. They call in naval bombardment that kills a few defenders and leaves the rest untouched. They advance behind tanks that get hit by anti-tank fire and burn with their crews trapped inside. By afternoon, covered in coral dust and their own filth, soaked with sweat and others' blood, they've moved perhaps 50 yards. They dig in as darkness falls, knowing that the Japanese will infiltrate during the night, not to launch banzai charges, but to probe defenses, cut throats, disappear before dawn. No one sleeps properly. Men hallucinate from exhaustion. Combat fatigue, what we now call PTSD, becomes epidemic. Men who've survived Guadalcanal, men with years of combat experience, start refusing orders, freezing under fire, weeping uncontrollably. They're not cowards, they're men who've been pushed past human endurance.
The caves reveal horrors that stay with men for decades. When Marines finally penetrate some of the larger complexes, they find aid stations where Japanese surgeons performed amputations without anesthesia, chambers where wounded soldiers were left to die when supplies ran out, storage rooms filled with decomposing bodies that the defenders lived beside for weeks.
They find evidence of cannibalism, not ritual but desperate, the last food when rice runs out. They find letters from Japanese soldiers to families they'll never see again, expressing no regret for dying but profound sorrow for bringing shame if they're captured. The cultural gulf between American and Japanese soldiers, already vast, becomes absolute in these tunnels. The Japanese fight with a discipline and fatality that Americans cannot comprehend. They refuse surrender, even when wounded, even when surrounded, even when all hope vanishes. Marines learn to never assume a Japanese soldier is dead. Even men shot multiple times will detonate grenades when Americans approach. Trust dies, mercy dies. Men start killing everything that moves, checking bodies with bullets, becoming the kind of soldiers they never thought they'd be. Colonel Nakagawa, commanding from his cave headquarters deep in the Yumur Brogul, watches his garrison die but never breaks. He rotates his remaining troops to maintain pressure, conserves ammunition ruthlessly, continues transmitting situation reports to higher headquarters even as American forces close in. His last radio message, sent November 24th, reports fewer than 50 men remaining under his command and states his intention to lead a final attack. That night, Nakagawa burns his regimental colors, distributes the last ammunition, and apparently commits ritual suicide in his command cave, though his body is never conclusively identified. His final defenders launch a pre-dawn attack on army positions that achieves nothing except their own deaths. On November 27, 1944, 73 days after the first Marines hit the beach, Peleliu is declared secure. The butcher's bill is staggering. The 1st Marine Division suffers over 6,500 casualties, including 1,500 dead, a 39% casualty rate that approaches the percentages seen in the worst battles of World War I. The Army's 81st Infantry Division adds another 3,000 casualties. Total American losses, nearly 10,000 men killed or wounded. The Japanese garrison dies almost to the last man. Fewer than 200 of the original 10,000 defenders survive to be captured, most of them Korean laborers rather than Japanese soldiers. The island the Marines were promised would fall in 3 days takes over 2 months to secure. The strategic justification, protecting MacArthur's flank during the Philippines invasion, proves unnecessary. Admiral Halsey, before the battle begins, recommends canceling the operation because Peleliu's airfield isn't needed. He's overruled. In retrospect, most military historians consider Peleliu a strategic mistake, a battle that consumed Marines for minimal gain. But that judgment misses something crucial. The tactical and psychological lessons from Peleliu reshaped American Pacific War doctrine for every battle that follows. The cave fighting techniques developed in those coral ridges, paid for with Marine lives, become standard training for Iwo Jima and Okinawa. The realization that Japanese defensive doctrine has fundamentally changed, that banzai charges are finished, that the enemy will fight from prepared positions with suicidal determination, forces American planners to abandon optimistic timetables and accept that future battles will require months of grinding combat. The integration of flamethrowers, demolitions, and infantry at the squad level becomes formalized. Tank infantry coordination improves. The use of artillery in close support gets refined. Even the recognition that combat fatigue is a legitimate medical condition, not cowardice, stems partly from the psychological casualties on Peleliu. The Marines who survive take these lessons to Iwo Jima 4 months later, and those lessons save American lives even though Iwo Jima proves even bloodier in total casualties. But for the men who fought in those ridges and crawled into those caves, the lessons mean something else entirely. Eugene Sledge writes that Peleliu broke something in him that never healed, that he carried the stench of death and coral dust in his nightmares for the rest of his life. He describes veterans sitting together decades later, unable to explain to civilians what happened on that island, unable to make people understand that courage alone was never enough, that luck mattered more than skill, that the best men died and the survivors feel guilty for living. The Marine Corps studies Peleliu for its tactical innovations, but struggles to acknowledge its psychological cost, the price of asking young men to fight an enemy that refuses death, in terrain that resembles hell, for objectives that prove militarily marginal.
The caves of Peleliu still exist. Tourists visit them now, walk through entrances that Marines died attacking, stand in chambers where Japanese soldiers waited in darkness for 73 days. The coral no longer stinks of death, but it remembers. In military staff colleges, Peleliu becomes a case study in the limits of firepower, the importance of terrain analysis, the danger of underestimating enemy adaptation. In the Marine Corps, Peleliu becomes something spoken about quietly, a battle that tested the Corps to its absolute limit and nearly broke it. The men who fought there received a Presidential Unit Citation, but most veterans would trade the medal to forget what they saw in those tunnels: the burned flesh, the screaming, the moment when they stopped being civilians in uniform and became killers, because that's what survival required. War always costs more than blood and treasure. It costs men their humanity, their ability to sleep without waking in terror, their capacity to believe the world is fundamentally good. The Marines who survived Peleliu came home to victory parades in gratitude, but they carried an island of coral and death inside their skulls, a place they could never leave, where their friends still died every night and the caves never ran out of enemies. They grew old and died themselves, mostly in silence about what happened there. Because how do you explain horror to people who cannot conceive of it? How do you make someone understand that the worst battle isn't the one you lose, but the one you win at a cost that makes victory meaningless? What they found in the tunnels of Peleliu? The answer is simple and terrible. They found the limits of human endurance. They found that the enemy could be brave and determined and still absolutely wrong. They found that technology and firepower cannot substitute for the willingness to die, and that sometimes the only way to defeat that willingness is to match it yard by bloody yard until nothing remains but silence and coral dust and the ghosts of men who deserved better than this forgotten island. The caves are empty now. The dead are gone. But Peleliu remains, a place where America learned that winning battles is never enough, that some victories just mean you're still alive when the killing stops, and that the cost of war is paid not just in casualties, but in what we force men to become in order to survive.